Welcome to the Run Out. I am Neo Barrett. We have a ton of lacrosse action to get into. The PLL playoffs started with a bang this past weekend where the Woods rolled and the Dogs might have maybe figured out their offense. We also have some international lacrosse action to talk about with Canada winning their first ever U20 World Championship, plus a very, very big trade in the NLL. But before we get into all of that, as those of you watching on YouTube can see, and as those of you listening may have noticed that I did not introduce Brandon in this episode, Brandon is not with us today. He had a death in his family, so Brandon, if you are listening, we want to send our thoughts and prayers if that's something that you are into, to you and to your family. And we hope that you guys find some peace in what is undoubtedly a tough time for you and your family. And we hope that you are back with us next week, but we will move on and talk about some lacrosse. In honor of Brandon this week, we're going to start with the NLL and what is probably some somewhat unfortunate news for Brandon, being a Canadian, a Colorado, brain not working. It's hard not having a co-host with me. I don't have anyone to talk to and bounce off of, but being a Colorado Mammoths fan is probably a little bit hard, but I'm a little bummed that you're not here to take your victory lap. For anyone who doesn't know, Zed Williams was traded from the Colorado Mammoth to the Rochester Nighthawks, and Brandon, in our group chat, the second that the Seneca Nation was announced as the new owners of the Nighthawks, he said, I have a feeling this means that Zed is going to be traded to the Nighthawks, and he was correct. Zed, for anyone, again, who doesn't know, is from the Seneca Nation and is arguably their biggest lacrosse star, so he gets to move home kind of literally and figuratively. He lives about an hour away from Rochester and will now be playing for his home nation, so that is kind of cool. Again, obviously for Brandon, as a Mammoth fan, is kind of a little bit of a bummer for him, but going to be pretty cool to see him play for the Nighthawks and his home nation. Also going to be really fun to see him and Connor Fields playing together this coming fall. Assuming he starts, I don't actually know. That's probably something I should have looked up. I did not. I don't know how long he still has. Obviously, he missed a good chunk of last season and missed all of the PLL season this year. So hopefully he's back on the field soon, if not at the beginning of the season, then very shortly thereafter. I know he's been around the summer box game. I don't think he's played or practiced or anything, but I know he's been on the bench with some of the summer box teams. So hopefully that is a good sign for him this upcoming season, and we get to see him on the floor for the Nighthawks and hopefully next spring with the PLL in training camp. So that was kind of the one big note from the NLL this season. We are still waiting for word on their CBA, as well as what training camp will look like before the start of hopefully a season starting later this year. But with that all out of the way, let's get into the PLL with the quarterfinal weekend this past weekend in Minneapolis. Jeez, my brain is just not working at all right now. The games in Minneapolis, we will start with the California Redwoods defeating the Carolina Chaos 14-12. Andrew McAdory led the Redwoods offense with 4 points. it just kind of proved to show that seriously, brain not working. It just went to show that McAdory not being a Rookie of the Year finalist was just laughably goofy and bizarre. He should absolutely have been an Rookie of the Year finalist as the Midfielder of the Year finalist that he also was, and I think made maybe his case for winning Rookie of the Year, Midfielder of the Year even better. Elsewhere, this game was just kind of a game of two halves. Carolina led 8-5 in the first half. Looked like they were going to maybe not cruise to a victory, but it looked like it was kind of their game to win. And in the second half, California came out and said, "Not so fast, my friend," in honor of Lee Corso, who just did his last game day episode this past weekend as well. California took the second half 9-4, held Carolina to 1 goal in the fourth quarter to complete their comeback and win. Blaze in goal kind of finished his up and down season on a down note with his second worst performance of the season. He finished the game with just 10 saves on 44%, which, for Blaze is pretty not great. On the other end of the field, he was, partnered with Chase Ireland. Ooh, it sounds incorrect, but it is correct. Ireland continuing his surge in play, making 18 saves to finish at 60%. Speaking of the tale of two halves, Chase Ireland had a tale of two seasons almost. He before the All-Star break, he was at 3 games under 50% and had 0 games over 55%. But since the All-Star break, he's had 1 game under 50% and 2 games over 60%. So he has been a big part of this kind of resurgence from the woods this year, and should certainly take a good portion of the credit for them being in the semifinals of the playoffs right now. And unfortunately, this means the Carolina Chaos season is done. They were, I still think, the story of the season this year, with them kind of being the at least again on paper, the worst team in the league coming into the season. Everyone thought they were going to comfortably be in last place. Not that they wouldn't necessarily win a game or whatever, but they would pretty comfortably be in last place, and really showed up and showed out. I think a lot of guys made a big name for themselves, and moving forward, I think they have some very good pieces that they are going to look to build around. I think in the offseason, we're going to be looking at what happens with Jackson Eicher. I think that's going to be one of the big talking points around this team, as well as perhaps what happens. I don't think that Blaze or Jack Rowlett or Jared Newman are likely to retire, but some of those guys are starting to get up there a little bit, and it could be interesting. They all seem to be lax rats, and like I said, I'm not expecting them to go, but wouldn't be the first time that we have entered an off season and had an unexpected retirement. But assuming that those guys are back, what they look to do in the off season with free agency and who they look at in next year's draft could be really interesting. I think you still probably feel like they need some offensive help, and what that looks like, who they're kind of going after in especially next year's draft, could be really telling. Additionally, I think there are a few guys out there on other teams that are unlikely to be on their teams and next season, and do the Chaos try and make a splash in free agency and bring in, maybe an older player like a Rob Pennell who can who can add something different to this chaos roster, maybe provide a quarterback role or some midfield help. Maybe there's a guy coming free in the midfield that can be that guy for them. It's going to be really interesting to see what they do in the upcoming offseason. And we'll get to the Redwoods here in a little bit. We'll talk about what it looks like for them moving forward. But let's move on to the really kind of bizarre thing that every time the Redwoods win, and especially every time the Redwoods win and Chris Kavanaugh plays well, the conversation always comes around to how did Chris Kavanaugh fall so far in the draft? And this is hopefully the last time that we'll have to talk about this, but it's just such a funny statement, I think, from them to say, how could Chris Kavanaugh have fallen so far in the draft? And the first thing I always want to point out is that Chris Kavanaugh was the 10th pick. We toss around second rounder like we do in other big time leagues like the NFL or NBA, where a second rounder is like the 48th pick, and that's the way people treat it. It's funny to think that he was still a top 10 pick, and people are acting like, it's some travesty that he fell so far. But I also think that if you really look at it, like from kind of a coaching perspective, I don't think it's that hard to understand. I think Chris Kavanaugh is proving that wrong, but coming into the draft and not knowing what you were going to get and basing it off of his college career, which was a good career, I don't think that it was that insane that he was looked at as a second round talent. His best season by far his best season was that 2024 season where he scored 81 points and Notre Dame won the national championship. They're second of the back-to-back national championships. And I think that is by far his best season. And if you look at a lot of the guys who are going at the higher end of the first round, that's not that good of a season. It certainly wasn't up there with the CJ Curse, the Brennan O'Neills, those guys like best season. I think the one caveat there is that Notre Dame doesn't often have those kinds of seasons from players. None of the Kavanaughs. In fact, that is the Kavanaugh's highest point total in any NCAA season. At 81 points is their highest point total. But, lots of guys, that 81 point season in 2025 would have been 7th in the rankings in the point totals of NCAA last year. So, it just wasn't a crazy standout season, statistically. And then I think you look at what he did on either side of that. He had 62 points in 2023 and 65 points in 2025 when in 2025 he was the guy for that Notre Dame team. He was the guy that was making everything run, and it was really him driving that offense. And so when you drop off 16 points when handed the keys and being given more responsibility, I think there's some questions that come up around how good you are and maybe not how good you are. Chris Kavanaugh was clearly a very good player, but whether or not you can be that number one guy that demands those higher draft picks from these teams making picks, I don't think anyone thought that this Chris Kavanaugh was going to be the guy that they were going to get. And to that point, I think he landed in kind of the perfect situation where I don't think he was clearly high profile enough. He was trusted enough to be the guy for them that can put up points, that can win games for them. But he also wasn't put in a situation where he had to be that number one guy for them. So again, I think he landed in kind of a perfect situation, though. To be fair, I'm not sure how many situations would have been the wrong situation for him. If you think about the Water Dogs, he wouldn't have had to, who had the number one pick, he wouldn't have had to be, the guy for them either. So, there were some other things for sure, but mostly I just think like being the 10th pick overall wasn't that crazy. And then you look at some of the guys that were picked around him, like Owen Hiltz at 8, two picks in front of him, where maybe you thought Chris Kavanaugh was the better option, or at least could have been the option at number 8. And while I think Chris Kavanaugh probably wins Rookie of the Year over Owen Hiltz, I think if Owen Hiltz has a full season and plays every game, he's right there, assuming that he continues the way that he did. He projects out the same kind of pace that he was at. He'd have been right there, or maybe even slightly above. I can't remember off the top of my head where Chris Kavanaugh is, and maybe we're talking about this Rookie of the Year race very, very differently. So I don't know, just this whole conversation that it's some travesty that he fell down to 10th, I think doesn't make a whole lot of sense. However, that being said, I think he's also proving his kind of pre-draft ranking and grading incorrect. And that's fine. I think those two things can be true. I think his draft place can be fine and can make a lot of sense based on what he had done and kind of how he projected forward. And he can prove those things incorrect. So, this whole thing about it being this travesty, I just find so funny. But let's move on to the other game this past weekend, where the Philadelphia Water Dogs beat the Maryland Whipsnakes 14-12. Funny that both games were 14-12 games. But coming into the game, most of the discussion was about CJ Kirst and whether he should play attack or midfield, and whether or not they should try and work Jake Taylor in. The Dogs had lost 4 straight coming into the game since CJ Kirst had been inserted. Wow, that was weird. But since CJ Kirst had been inserted into the lineup, the Dogs had not won a game, and they were going up against the top ranked defense in the league, at least statistically. Remove that kind of anomalous chaos game, and they were tied with Denver for 3rd. And I think most people would think that Denver was slightly better, even though, numerically, statistically, they would have been even. I think most people would have ranked Denver just slightly ahead. So, at best they were 3rd, they were 4th. If you remove that kind of wonky game from the chaos, which is debatable about whether or not that's, a good thing to do. I tend to think that it was such an anomalous game for both teams that I think it merits the conversation of doing that. But I also understand the argument that, they played that game, they won that game, they won it the way they won it, and the defense played the way that the defense did and silenced him. And so removing that one game is maybe unfair, but I kind of tend to think that the other way is also true, that game was such an anomaly that it doesn't give you a true measure of how good that defense is. But even in my ranking, I still think they were a good defense. It's not like you remove that and they were the worst defense in the league or anything. I still think they were an above average defense. Certainly better than some of the other defenses that we've talked about. CJ Kirst playing like the Water Dogs, like the Atlas, excuse me. Obviously he plays for the Water Dogs. But in that game, we talked about how porous that defense can be. I don't think the Whips have got that. So this was going to be a good test, a good litmus test of where CJ Kirst and this offense are. And you gotta say that they passed with flying colors. Michael Sowers was doing Michael Sowers things. He had 8 points. Kieran McCardle had, I believe it was 6, and CJ had 5. The MVP is supposed to be a regular season award, so this shouldn't have had any bearing on Michael Sowers' ability to win the MVP. He either had already won it or hadn't, but the second round of voting is still going on, so I gotta think this performance didn't hurt his chances of winning. He was absolutely a rock star out there, despite what the Sports Center highlight will mention, because they didn't mention him at all in the Sports Center highlight. Pretty cool that we got a Sports Center highlight for both of these games. Gotta say that. But them not mentioning Michael Sowers at all in that highlight was baffling, considering that he had probably the performance of the weekend. But all that to say, I think that this game really kind of showcased maybe where the Water Dogs are at the moment, and kind of maybe starting to figure out that offense and what that needs to look like moving forward. The issue here is that as good as Michael Sowers and Kieran McCardle and CJ Kirst looked, they got basically nothing out of that midfield. Jack Hanna had 1 assist on a goal, and Ben Weyer had 1 assist, and Dylan Hess had 1 assist. So that's 2 defensive midfielders who each had an assist on a fast break, and Jack Hanna, the 1 offensive midfielder that provided any points for them. And I'm not sure that is a way that this Water Dogs team can move forward, but all that to say, it worked for them in this game. They looked very good. It was clicking. Certainly, Michael Sowers, Kieran McCardle, and CJ Kirst seemed to, at least for this game, we talk on the show all the time about how we want to see it twice. We want to see you be able to repeat that performance. And I don't know that they're going to be able to. They take on the Atlas, and we'll talk about that game in a little bit, but I'm not sure that they'll be able to. But at least for this game, they got everything that they needed out of them. They did go 17 minutes scoreless at one point in this game, allowing the Whipsnakes to tie it up. It was 12-12 before Kieran McCardle scored the final 2 goals of the game and were able to hold on for the 14-12. So I think there's still some questions about whether or not this team can win in long term, but they got Matt DeLuca at 50% and won a game with him in goal. So, hard to take anything away from them on the performance overall of this game, even though there are some things that we can kind of note here and there. I think we all were kind of waiting for the Whips to do something, and they got a little run and were able to tie the game, but in the end it wasn't quite enough, and the Water Dogs move on to face, like I mentioned earlier, the Atlas. The Whipsnakes head home, and I think that there is going to be some real questions for this Whipsnakes team to figure out in this offseason. What happens with Rob Pennell, who had another very good game for them with 4 points on 2 goals and 2 assists, but ultimately a good game in a losing effort, which I believe just about every good effort game from him has led to a Whips loss. So going to be interesting to see what happens with Rob Pennell, whether he retires, hangs it up completely, or is with another team, or is back with the Whips. Who knows? I think Colin Heacock is another one. Obviously, Matt Rambo is one that looks to be done. And then defensively, There's a few questions about some of their aging guys. Matt Dunn is going to be a big question. The Jesse Bernhardt, is that correct? Jake Bernhardt. Dang it. Jesse Bernhardt is with the Outlaws. Jake Bernhardt, another guy who's getting up there, and, wouldn't be too crazy to see him, hanging it up or finding a new team or something, moving on, looking for a chance to win. But ultimately, I think it's time for this Whips roster and team to be handed over to these young guns. We talk about it again all the time on this show. The future of this Whipsnakes roster, or this Whipsnakes team, is handing the keys to TJ Malone and Aiden Carroll and Levi Anderson and the rest of these young guns, and letting them be who you brought them in to be, the future of this franchise. And I think that means that there's going to be a lot of, maybe not a lot, but there's going to be some big name changes in this off season. And we talked about the chaos earlier. I think Rob Pennell was a player that should have probably gone to the chaos last year. If he doesn't retire and he wants to play again, is that a move that happens this offseason? I don't know. We will see. But that is certainly kind of the question coming into the Whips offseason, which we have now entered into. Let's move on to the games this upcoming weekend. Philly moves on to the semifinals to play the New York Atlas. They will be kind of playing a home game because the games are in Philadelphia this year at Subaru Park. I would love to tell you that I see a way that Philly is going to win this game, and I just don't see it happening. The margins in this league are razor thin. Anybody can win. Everybody is loaded with talent, and anyone can win. But I just don't see how it's going to happen. The defense, I don't think, is quite good enough. The goalie play is not quite good enough. Midfield has not really put up much of anything since CJ Kirst was inserted into the lineup. All of their offensive midfielders have been sitting somewhere around 15 points, basically since CJ Kirst was added to the lineup. So the only way that I can see it happening is Michael Sauer, CJ Kirst, and Kieran McCardle just absolutely ball out once again. And Liam Entenmann has another sub 40% game. And even then, it feels like it's going to take something extraordinary from them defensively, whether that's a goalie stepping up and standing on his head, or one of the defenders just stepping up and just deciding to shut down one of those three attackmen, kind of throwing, one of the Water Dogs defensemen shutting down, Shelley or Teat. I just don't really see how it's going to happen. Again, like we talked about, they played 2 weeks ago in Boston, last game of the regular season for each of those teams, and the Water Dogs lost, and that was with those three attackmen, Sowers, McCardle, and Kirst, playing very, very well. Maybe not as well as they did this past week, but very, very well. And Liam Entenmann being sub 40% on the game, and they still didn't win it. So that was damn near the perfect plan for them coming in, and they still didn't win the game. So you're going to have to get even more of a perfect setup for them to win the game. The Atlas are also coming in off of rest, and they got to practice last week while other teams were playing. So I just don't really see it. I'm going with the Atlas on this game. Moving on to the next game, the California Redwoods will play the Denver Outlaws in the second semifinal. Actually, I don't know if it's the first or the second. I don't know what the schedule is off the top of my head. But as we're talking about them, the second, maybe the other semifinal, let's go that way. The other semifinal sees the California Redwoods taking on the Denver Atlas. And similar to the first semifinal game, I'd love to say that the California Redwoods are going to be able to pull this off, but I just don't see how it's possible. I don't think they are as good as the Denver Outlaws at any facet of the game. I take that back. The one facet of the game that they're clearly better than the Denver Outlaws is facing off, and I'd say that is amongst the least relevant areas of the game to be good at if you're looking to win a game. The shot clock, as we have talked about many times, is the great neutralizer for these offenses. So yeah, I just don't see it. I don't think they're as good offensively or defensively as the Outlaws are. I don't think their goalie play is as good. I don't think they score as well. The one caveat we'll say is the Denver Outlaws have not played. When this game kicks off, they will have not played in a month. And I think maybe the best chance that you can give the Redwoods is that the Outlaws are just rusty and out of game mentality enough that the Redwoods can kind of run out and just hold on and, win that way just by kind of starting 5-0, 7-0, 8-0, whatever, and just outpacing the Outlaws. Because if the Outlaws can get their legs under them in the first quarter, I don't think they really have much of a chance. Of course, because I've said that about both teams, it'll go the complete opposite way. That's just the way these things go. We know that. But again, I don't know. I'd love to hear what the argument is, especially for the Redwoods. I think maybe you can make the argument that the Water Dogs could jump on them. They've got enough firepower that if they can jump on the Atlas early and make it uncomfortable for the Atlas, that they could just outscore the Atlas. I guess you could make that argument for the Redwoods. Chris Cavanaugh, Dylan Malloy, Andrew McAdory, they've got some firepower for sure. I just don't think it's really their style to do that. So I don't know that even that kind of game plan really works out all that well. But if they could do it, that is maybe the only chance that they've got. But I just don't even think that is it. I think the only real chance for them is just that Denver just doesn't show up. Because again, I think they are better at basically every single facet of the game. So that means that I'm picking us to have a Denver Outlaws versus New York Atlas number 1 versus number 2 championship game coming up in a couple of weeks at Sports Illustrated Stadium, I think is what it is, Sports Illustrated Stadium in New York. I guess technically it's New Jersey. We know it's New Jersey. It's Harrison, New Jersey, whatever. So yeah, those are my 2 picks for this championship game. But I'd love to hear what you guys think. Who are you guys taking? Let's move over to the international game where Canada knocked off the U.S. in the U20 World Championship gold medal game. It was the first time that the U.S. had ever not won the gold medal at the U20 World Championships. The U.S. had been dominant all tournament. They had beaten Canada earlier in the tournament, and at least on paper had the quote unquote better team. Canada came into this game played a slower, methodical, physical game that the U.S. if their pace of play really frustrated the U.S. all day. They just couldn't seem to adapt to it. Terry Foy wrote a great article for Inside Lacrosse about how this U20 Canada team used nearly an identical game plan to what the senior Canadian national team used in 2014 to beat the U.S. in the World Championships in Denver. Definitely check that out if that sounds even remotely interesting to you. It was a really cool read. And Terry's article goes into a lot of depth and gets way deeper into the tactics used and how the games were similar. But one of the most obvious similarities between the 2014 senior Canadian national team and this U20 national team was riding a hot goalie. In 2014, that was Dylan Ward. In this tournament and especially this game, it was all about current Denver University goalie Grayson Manning. Another reason I wish Brandon was here, he'd be celebrating how well Grayson Manning played, and several other big stars for Denver were at this U20 and really showed out. But Grayson Manning finished the game at 75%, making 15 saves, the most important of which was the final one, in which he made a stunning save on Colin Cardilla. I think. I don't know. I think it was Cardilla. Right as time expired to secure the 1-goal victory and the gold medal for Canada. Grayson finished the tournament at 66% and was named the tournament MVP. He was incredible. I am really excited to see what he does at Denver this year. He feels like, it feels a lot like Liam Entenmann watching him play. He's maybe not quite as showcase athletic as Liam Entenmann, but the thing that reminded me, I think, of Liam Entenmann was the what's the word I'm looking for here, the way that he always made the save when the team needed him to, when the U.S. started making runs, or any team for that matter in this tournament started making runs, he always came up with a save that kind of got the momentum back to Canada. And I'm really, like I said, I'm really excited to see what he does on the field. After the loss, there were a ton, and I mean a ton, of people turning this single game into a referendum of lacrosse in their country. The Americans were bemoaning the U.S. club system and its focus on money making over player development. Lacrosse All-Stars, an American lacrosse outlet, said that this game was, quote, proof that grit beats hype every time, which is a ridiculous headline. It'd be one thing if they were, dancing at midfield and doing TikToks and they were just hype, and these Canadians were these unknown players that, came out of the box system and were just these tough-nosed, quiet kids that just played lacrosse. But there was plenty of hype and plenty of grit on both sides of the ball. And it was such a goofy headline. But that was kind of the American reaction. Conversely, the Canadians were celebrating the superior development qualities of the indoor game and their development system in Canada. I saw accounts that spend every other day complaining about the youth system in Canada suddenly were its biggest cheerleaders and talking about how much better it is than the US system. And the truth is that this was a single game in which Canada was just better on the day. The entire tournament, if you look at the entire tournament, both teams were 5-1. Both teams' sole loss came to the other team by a single goal. If you looked at this as a two-leg game, it was a 12-12 tie that would have needed extra time to sort out. So these two teams were basically evenly matched in every aspect. And I think any attempts to draw a larger conclusion about the merits of national systems or box versus field, or, you know, our variation is better or anything, at best those things are misguided. At worst there's something probably more sinister or severe. So, you know, I this was just a team, this was just a game in which one team performed ever so slightly better and was able to win a game. It was not a referendum on either country's system or players or attitude or grit or anything like that. So I don't know. I don't know why we do this after every single international tournament. The team that loses by one goal, you know, is at rock bottom and needs to change everything about the way that they've been doing things. You know, the US beat Canada in the Netanya games by literally a last second goal, and that was a travesty for Canada, just exactly like, you know, Grayson making a last second save on what would have been a game tying goal means it's a travesty for the US. It's all overreaction. It's all silly. It's all goofy. And don't get me wrong, that's not to say that there aren't things that need to be done in both countries to make the system better and more equitable and more accessible for youth players to help grow the game. There are certainly those things, but trying to tie all of these things into one neat bow is just where things go off the rails for me. So anyway, that is going to do it for the show. It was a quick one today, just me and only a couple of games to talk about. But before I get out of here, I just wanted to take a moment to say thank you to all of you for listening to the Run Out and making this show what it is. Last week, I had an internet troll try and insult me by talking about, quote, the 25 people that listen to my podcast. And while I don't care a single thing about what that troll or any other troll has to say, this comment got to me, but in the opposite way of what was intended. It really made me think about the fact that anyone at all listens to this podcast, to me and Brandon, doing something that we love and talking about this game that we love so much, and just how insane that is, that anyone listens to us at all, much less 25 people, which is not even the number of people that listens to the show. It's not a number worth bragging about, but it is more than 25 people. But you know, it's just insane to think about. All I ever wanted when I started this show was to build out a community of people that love lacrosse and enjoy talking about the game and debating some of the finer topics that largely probably can't be proven. And I'm thankful to anyone who wants to be a part of that, much less 25 people, to be really honest. The fact that 25 people want to be a part of that is just mind-blowing to me. So Whether you have been here from episode 1 or you just recently found this podcast, thank you very much for tuning in. I hope that you have enjoyed it, and I want to seriously, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being part of the 25. That maybe sounds dramatic. We ain't going nowhere. We'll be back next week. Don't think anything, but it was just an interaction that made me kind of reflect on the last year or so since I started this podcast, and you know, Brandon joining and everything, and you guys interacting with us, and just made me reflective and thankful, and I just wanted to actually express my thanks for that. And off of that, I mentioned a few weeks ago that I wanted to do a mailbag for you guys to ask questions, and we are going to do that this week. So keep an eye out on our social channels for that. But also, you can always reach out to us with comments and questions. It doesn't even have to be lacrosse related. In fact, we probably would have more fun with the non-lacrosse related questions. So let us know your hot take, comment on one of our takes, ask us a question, ask our thoughts on Star Wars or wrestling or music or whatever it is that you want to ask us about. We will take it all. We would love to hear from you guys. It is a much more fun show when you guys are involved. I am Neil Barrett on both Instagram and Twitter. Brandon is at Hoot Sports Media on, again, both Instagram and Twitter. And the show is at Runout Pod on both Instagram and Twitter as well. Also, don't forget to subscribe, leave a rating, a like, a comment, whatever your preferred platform allows. Do that. It really, really helps out the show. And we will see you guys next week where, again, hopefully Brandon is back and we can talk all about what will no doubt be an incredible set of semifinal games and hear from you guys during the mailbag. But until then, as always, we'll catch you guys in the comments section.